Hey guys, tonight we're stepping back into a world that gleams with gold and bleeds in shadows. A city teetering on the edge of ruin while pretending to be eternal. Imagine torches flickering on marble columns, laughter echoing down corridors gilded with deceit, and beneath it all, a question whispered in the dark. Quo Vadis? Where are you going? This book belongs to Playlist Level 7, the search for truth, a journey through the deepest corridors of human thought. Truth, transcendence, and the flickering candle of faith held against the roaring wind of power. Quo Vadis is not just a love story or a historical drama. It's a philosophical inquiry draped in velvet and blood. We read it not just to watch ancient Rome collapse, but to listen to what survived. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from tonight? Drop your location and your local time in the comments below. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. We begin in Nero's Rome. The empire still struts with pride, but behind the feasts and statues, cracks are showing. The nobility distract themselves with silk, scent, and scandal. Into this scene steps Marcus Vinicius, a young Roman tribune, just back from war in Armenia, strong, confident, but not yet wise. He arrives at the home of his uncle, Petronius, a man who lives like a decadent philosopher. Petronius is refined, intelligent, dangerously witty. He moves in Nero's inner circle not with loyalty, but with irony. He knows the game, plays it better than most, and yet somewhere behind his half-smiles and veiled insults, he seems to despise the whole charade. At Petronius's villa, Marcus meets Lygia. She's not a Roman woman, not quite. A hostage taken from a northern tribe. She has grown up in a Roman household, raised almost like a daughter, but she carries herself with quiet dignity. She's beautiful, of course, but there's something else, something deeper, a kind of light. Marcus is instantly drawn to her, though he doesn't yet understand why. She speaks little, her eyes are clear, her manner modest. And already that unsettles him, because here's a man used to admiration, applause, conquest. But with Lygia, the usual scripts fail. She's polite but distant. He's intrigued. Desire flickers. Petronius, ever the puppeteer, sees this spark and decides to fan it. After all, why not arrange a little entertainment? A little love story to break up the monotony of court politics and emperor flattery? But Lygia is more than a minor character in someone else's drama. She belongs, spiritually, fully, to a hidden world Marcus knows nothing about. A world of whispered prayers, secret gatherings, symbols scratched in doorways. She's a Christian. Now, that word, Christian, means something very different in this Rome. It's not a religion of cathedrals or crosses on chains. It's a rumor, a sect, a nuisance, perhaps a threat. And for someone like Marcus, it's vaguely distasteful. The empire demands order, strength, control. This strange little movement preaches humility, sacrifice, love. What kind of Roman could take that seriously? But for Lygia, it's not a metaphor. It's her center. After the meeting, Marcus grows obsessed. He wants Lygia, desires her, believes he can win her, because that's what Roman men do. Petronius, watching this with amusement, agrees to help. He uses his influence with Nero to declare Lygia an official hostage of the state, removing her from her adopted Roman family and placing her into Marcus's care. It's legal, it's strategic, and it's a theft dressed in protocol. Lygia, terrified and heartbroken, is taken from her home, not to a prison, but to something worse, a cage lined in silk. She's brought to Marcus's lavish house, treated with respect, offered everything but freedom. Marcus, in his blindness, sees this as generosity. He's confused when she doesn't respond with gratitude. He's given her luxury, power. What more could she want? But Lygia is silent, cold, then finally resolute. She tells him she will not be his, that her heart belongs elsewhere, that her God, unseen, mysterious, crucified, is more real than all his triumphs. Marcus is furious, offended, bewildered. He cannot understand. And beneath the anger, something else, a whisper of doubt. The next morning, Lygia is gone, escaped, disappeared into the twisting alleys of Rome's underworld, into the catacombs and shadows where the Christians live and hide. Marcus is shaken, not just because he's lost her, but because he's no longer sure what he's chasing. Is it her beauty, her resistance, or something deeper that he doesn't have a name for yet? He hires a man named Chilon, a Greek con man, philosopher for hire, coward in a tunic. Chilon is the kind of character who survives because he tells everyone what they want to hear. He promises Marcus he can find Lygia. But Kylan's methods are less than holy. He spies, lies, betrays. And the deeper he digs into the Christian community, the more danger he brings, because now Rome is paying attention. Now the empire knows that something is stirring. And Marcus? He is beginning to feel the cracks inside himself. He's been a soldier. He's taken cities. But he cannot conquer this. Not with power. Not with politics. Something is changing. Remember this moment. Because love, when it is real, is a revolution. And Marcus is about to be reborn, not as a victor, but as a seeker. Marcus Vinicius paces in the cold echo of his villa, haunted not by the loss of possession, but by the absence of meaning. Lygia has slipped through his fingers like smoke, and what lingers is not anger. It's something more dangerous for a Roman nobleman, self-doubt. Chilon Kilonides, the slippery Greek Marcus has employed, returns with promises. He's seen symbols, heard whispers. He claims he can infiltrate the Christians and uncover their hiding places. He weaves stories like a spider spins webs, sticky, gleaming, but ultimately made to trap. Marcus doesn't trust him entirely, but desperation makes allies of the absurd. Kylan's leads eventually point to Ursus, Lygia's loyal protector, a giant of a man, quiet, simple, but fiercely devoted. Chilon witnesses Ursus attending clandestine Christian gatherings in the poorer quarters of the city. In these secret places, candles flicker against stone walls. Bread is broken. Words are whispered that threaten empires more than swords ever could. Marcus, veiled and disguised, follows Kylan's guidance and enters a world so unlike his own, it feels like stepping into a dream. The gathering he stumbles into is humble, almost shockingly so. No voz, no veranger. Just people, tired faces, calloused hands, soft voices. And in the center of it all, a man named Peter. Yes, that Peter, the apostle, old now and weathered, but his presence stirs something even in the hardened soldier. Peter speaks not with thunder, but with fire. He tells stories of love, of sacrifice, of a kingdom not built by emperors but by outcasts. He speaks of a man who died and rose again, not to take thrones, but to wash feet. And in the dimness of that moment, Marcus sees Lygia. She is seated in the crowd, unnoticed, her eyes lifted not to him, but to something far beyond. And suddenly, Marcus understands she hasn't just run away. She has run toward something he cannot name, but deeply envies. After the gathering, he manages to speak with her. The reunion is tense. Lygia is kind but distant. She doesn't plead. She doesn't weep. She simply tells him, if he wishes to know her, he must understand her world, her faith. Marcus is shaken. He returns home quiet, storm brewing behind his eyes. Petronius mocks him gently for his distraction. Nero has summoned him for a banquet, and he must look the part. The emperor, after all, is writing a new poem and demands an audience. The empire continues to spin its golden lies while souls like Lygia's slip through its fingers. At the palace, the excess is suffocating. Nero, flabby and florid, recites verses about divine beauty while torturing musicians for missing a note. Tigellinus, the cruel prefect, whispers suggestions in his ear. Everything is performance, everything decay. Petronius watches it all with the weariness of a man who has seen the end before it arrives. Marcus stands among them, feeling suddenly alien. The laughter is hollow. The silks itch. The wine tastes like ash. And all he can think of is that gathering in the catacombs, the quiet songs, the strength in those fragile hands. Chilon returns with a plan. He believes he can provoke Ursus into a confrontation, bait him, trap him, expose the Christians. Marcus, reluctant but still lost in his own confusion, allows it to proceed. The plan is set in motion. Chilon arranges for a fake threat, a staged attack where Ursus will be forced to defend Lygia. If Ursus kills a Roman citizen, the Christians will be unmasked and destroyed. It's a trap layered in poison. But it doesn't go as planned. Ursus does defend Lygia, and with terrifying strength. But he does not kill. The attacker dies by accident. The crowd disperses, and in the chaos, Lygia and Ursus vanish once again into the labyrinth of Rome. Marcus is devastated, not by the failure of the plan, but by his own failure to understand. Each step he takes toward Lygia reveals how far he truly is from her world. Days pass, then weeks. Rome continues its dance, gladiators and gossip, temples and treachery. But Marcus withdraws. He begins to read, to ask questions, to seek out Peter, not as a soldier hunting prey, but as a man grasping for truth. Peter receives him cautiously, but over time, something shifts. Marcus listens, not just with his ears, but with his soul. He hears about love that does not demand, about strength and gentleness, about a man who forgave his killers. And inside Marcus, the iron begins to bend. Not break, but bend. He's no longer chasing Lygia. He's chasing the light she carries. One night, he finds her again. She sees him not as a threat, but changed. The reunion is quiet. No declarations, no grand gestures. Just two people, once on opposite shores, now kneeling side by side in the same current. They speak of the world outside, of Nero, of Rome, of danger. The persecution has grown. Christians are being arrested, tortured, thrown to beasts for Nero's amusement. The city is darkening. The hour is late. But for Marcus and Lygia, a strange peace has taken root. Not safety, not certainty, but peace. Love, real love, has entered their story. And like faith, it demands not possession, but surrender. Then one night, fire. It begins quietly, like so many disasters do. A flicker near the Circus Maximus. A small blaze, perhaps an accident, or perhaps something far darker. But the wind is cruel that evening, and the streets of Rome are narrow, lined with wooden structures, dry and waiting. Within hours, the flames devour entire quarters. Roofs collapse. Smoke thickens. The screams rise like a second inferno. Rome burns. The fire rages for days. It moves in waves, unstoppable, fed by chaos and Nero's own madness. Witnesses swear they saw imperial guards blocking attempts to extinguish the blaze, even accelerating it. Nero, they whisper, watched from his private tower, lyre in hand, singing of Troy as his city dissolved into ash. When the embers cool, what remains is ruin and fury. The people, homeless, starving, stunned, begin to murmur. Eyes turn toward the palace, toward the man who ruled while Rome was reduced to cinders. Nero, in his twisted brilliance, knows he must find a scapegoat. He blames the Christians. It's easy. They are already disliked, misunderstood. They meet in secret. They refuse to sacrifice to Roman gods. They speak of a man who will come again, not as a Caesar, but as a judge. They are foreign in their own city. And so the terror begins. Arrests, seizures, trials by mockery. Christians are flung into prisons that echo with weeping. Some are nailed to crosses, others sewn into animal skins and torn apart by dogs in the arenas. Still others are coated in pitch and burned as living torches to light Nero's gardens at night. Marcus watches with horror. He knows now, with certainty, that the Christians had nothing to do with the fire. That this is not justice, but spectacle. Not law, but lunacy. He pleads with Petronius to intervene. Petronius, elegant and resigned, tells him the truth. Reason has no voice in madness. Nero is beyond persuasion. Tigellinus now controls him. The empire has become a stage, and the Christians, the script's necessary villains. Marcus returns to the hidden gatherings. He tells Lygia and Peter what is coming. He urges them to flee. But Peter, calm and rooted, speaks of another kind of escape. He reminds them of Christ's words about the cost of truth, the weight of the cross. Some Christians do flee. Many stay. They choose to remain not because they wish to die, but because they believe something must survive the flames. Then comes the day Marcus dreads. Lygia is arrested. She and Ursus are taken in the night, betrayed by Chelon, who, cornered and desperate, has given them up in a final grasp at favor. Marcus is shattered. He confronts Chelon, who crumbles under the weight of his own guilt. The Greek, surprisingly, begins to change. Haunted by the suffering he's seen, by the courage of those he has betrayed, Chelon begins to crack open. He seeks Peter. He asks for forgiveness. And in one of the novel's quiet miracles, it is given. Marcus rushes to the prison. But Lygia's fate has already been sealed. She is to be executed in the arena. The plan is as cruel as it is theatrical. She will be tied to a wooden stake, placed at the center of the arena, and a bull, wild, enraged, will be released. It is meant to be entertainment, a spectacle for the bloodthirsty crowd. But it is also meant to send a message. This is what becomes of those who follow Christ. Marcus moves heaven and earth to stop it. He pleads, he bribes, he threatens. But Rome has already set the date. The morning arrives. The arena fills. Nero watches from his imperial box, flanked by courtiers who flatter while holding back nausea. Lygia is brought out, pale but unshaken. She prays. The crowd is restless. Then the gates open, and the bull charges. But something happens. Ursus is there. Chained, yes, but the chains have been loosened. Whether by accident or divine design, no one knows. He breaks free. The beast thunders toward Lygia. Ursus throws himself into its path. What follows is not just struggle, is legend. Ursus, giant of faith and muscle, wrestles the bull in front of tens of thousands. The crowd gasps. Some cry out. Some cheer. Blood is spilled. But in the end, the impossible occurs. Ursus breaks the beast's neck. The arena falls silent. And then, astonishingly, cheers. The crowd, hungry for blood, has instead tasted something purer. Courage, love, sacrifice. Nero, seeing the turn in mood, hesitates. Petronius, seizing the moment, persuades him to grant mercy, to let Lygia and Ursus live for now. Marcus races to her. For the first time, their embrace is not forbidden, not stolen, but fully seen. Love, once shadowed by power and fear, now stands in the light of survival. Yet Rome is not safe. Nero's madness worsens. Petronius, disillusioned beyond return, writes one final, perfect insult, a letter exposing the emperor's vanity and cruelty. Then, in his bath, surrounded by perfumes and poetry, he takes his own life with grace. Peter, too, faces death. Arrested, sentenced, he is led to execution. But he asks one final request, to be crucified upside down. For he is not worthy, he says, to die as his master did. The image is unforgettable. A man, old, broken, radiant, hanging not in defeat, but in hope. Marcus and Lygia leave Rome, not as fugitives, but as pilgrims. They do not seek power. They seek peace, a new life built not on conquest, but on something Rome could never understand, love without condition. And far behind them, the empire cracks. Statues crumble. Names fade, but a new name echoes beneath the ashes. Christus. When we step back from the flickering images of fire and cruelty, of Ursus wrestling fate in the arena, and of Peter's inverted cross silhouetted against a collapsing empire, we begin to feel the vast weight Quo Vadis carries, not merely as a novel of events, but as a document of the soul's resistance to tyranny. This is where our journey moves from the story's surface to its depths. Now begins the second half, the analysis and review, our gentle descent into meaning. At its heart, Quo Vadis is a question. The title is Latin for, "Where are you going?" A question Christ is said to have asked Peter in apocryphal texts when Peter, fleeing persecution, meets him on the road. Peter, stunned, asks, "Domini, quo vadis?" Lord, where are you going? And Christ replies, "I'm going to Rome to be crucified again." That moment of revelation sends Peter back to Rome, back to his own martyrdom, back to the heart of faith. This question, posed not only to Peter, but to all of us, reverberates across every page of Sienkiewicz's novel. Where are we going? And why? Sienkiewicz is not merely retelling early Christian history. He is doing something deeper, crafting an allegory of spiritual awakening in the midst of the world's decay. His Rome is both historical and symbolic. It is the world at the height of its splendor and the brink of its moral collapse. Gold on the outside, rot beneath. In this Rome, everything is for sale: pleasure, power, loyalty, even the gods. The populace is drunk on distraction, addicted to spectacle. Nero's cruelty doesn't just go unpunished, it is applauded. The Colosseum becomes not only a place of death, but of national identity. A people cheering as their own souls burn. And then, into that void, comes something quietly luminous. Christianity in Quo Vadis is not polished theology. It is raw, trembling courage. It is Peter stumbling through back alleys, Paul preaching with fire in his chest, and believers whispering prayers while their neighbors turn them in. It is a girl like Lygia refusing to trade her soul for safety. It is Ursus willing to fight, but only for love, not for pride, not for vengeance. This is not the religion of stained glass windows. It is the underground church, the faith of the hunted. Sienkiewicz presents it not with heavy doctrine, but with glowing imagery, candlelit gatherings, hymns sung under the moon, forgiveness offered even to the betrayer. These moments do not preach, they illuminate. And for Marcus, this light is disorienting. He begins as Rome's son, proud, cultured, entitled. His initial attraction to Lygia is possessive. He is not evil, but blind, used to getting what he wants, confused when he is met with refusal. But Lygia is no ordinary love interest. She does not flirt or yield. She stands, a moral mirror in which Marcus sees, for the first time, the hollowness of his own world. Her resistance is not passive. It is revolutionary. Marcus's transformation is central to the novel's genius. It is not a single, grand gesture. It unfolds gradually. He wrestles with what he sees. He tries to reconcile the brutality he's known with the gentleness he's encountering. His journey is not from bad to good. It is from blindness to sight. This is, perhaps, the novel's true miracle. Not the arena, not the fire, but the idea that a man bred in domination can learn humility. That power can be unlearned. That the heart can, in fact, change. We also must speak of Nero. There are many literary villains, but few as chilling as Nero. Sienkiewicz does not make him a cartoon. Nero is poetic. He is cultured. He writes music. He desires applause. He is, in many ways, a tragic figure, a man whose need to be adored outweighs his ability to govern. But it is precisely this vanity, unchecked and worshipped, that makes him monstrous. He is what happens when ego becomes a god. In contrast, Petronius is a study in elegance under duress. Known as the arbiter of elegance, he moves through Nero's court with grace and irony. He survives not by power, but by wit. His letters, his observations, his final act of defiance, all of these make him a quiet hero. He reminds us that one can be surrounded by decadence, yet remain uncorrupted inside. That intellect and conscience can be allies, not enemies. And then we return to Peter, old, tired, humble. Sienkiewicz gives him no magic, only love. Peter walks through the novel like a shepherd among lions. He doubts. He weeps. He carries his shame like a shadow. But he also heals. He forgives. He speaks of another kingdom, not made of marble, but of mercy. And it is this vision that triumphs. The novel ends not with conquest, but with conversion, not of the sword, but of the heart. As Rome burns, as Nero collapses into his own delusions, as the empire begins to eat itself, the Christians do not fight back with force. They endure. They remain. They remember. And in doing so, they plant something immortal. Quo Vadis is not just a historical novel. It is a meditation on what it means to live in truth, even when the world mocks it. It asks us in whispers, what do you stand for? What would you die for? And more importantly, what would you live for? Sienkiewicz won the Nobel Prize for this book, and not because it was popular, though it was, but because it dared to show the eternal battle between tyranny and tenderness, between cruelty and conscience. This novel reminds us that history is not just a record of wars and rulers. It is also the quiet, defiant light of a woman who prays, a man who changes, a faith that refuses to be extinguished. And perhaps, in reading it, we too are asked that quiet, unsettling question, Quo Vadis? Where are you going? To truly grasp the brilliance of Quo Vadis, we have to linger with its architecture, the way Henryk Sienkiewicz designs time, tension, and transformation. This isn't just a novel, it's a symphony. Each character, each scene, even the silence between horrors, is part of a larger orchestral movement. And yet, beneath all the historical spectacle, the novel remains deeply intimate, an echoing chamber of personal, moral decisions. Let's begin with contrast. It's the lifeblood of this novel. Sienkiewicz constantly places opposites next to one another. The splendor of Nero's banquets against the agony of Christian prisons, the sensuality of Roman pleasures beside the spiritual purity of Lygia's community, the brute force of Ursus against the humility of his faith. This pattern is not just aesthetic, it's philosophical. It reminds us, over and over, that every civilization is a paradox, capable of exquisite beauty and unimaginable cruelty in the same breath. Rome, in this book, is a character in itself. It breathes, it groans, it corrupts, and it tests every soul that enters its orbit. Think about the parties thrown in Nero's palace. They're dreamlike, almost surreal. Walls covered in silk, golden plates heaped with exotic meats, dancers performing by the flickering light of human torches. It's beautiful until you realize what you're actually seeing. This is Rome's trick. It decorates horror. It perfumes decay. Sienkiewicz shows us this not to shock us, but to shake us awake. He wants us to see that empires can collapse not from invasion, but from moral rot. Now, the structure of the novel itself mirrors this decay. The first part is almost leisurely, lavish scenes, political games, romantic tension. But as we move deeper, the tone darkens. Time speeds up. Events tighten. The pressure builds. It's like a heartbeat growing faster. You feel the walls of Rome closing in. And within this tightening frame, love becomes more precious. Marcus and Lygia's relationship is so compelling not because it's dramatic, but because it feels earned. Marcus doesn't get a conversion discount. He must change completely. He must walk through fire, not just to be with Lygia, but to be worthy of her. She, in turn, never compromises her beliefs for comfort. She doesn't bend to fit his world. He rises to hers. It's rare in literature, even now, to find a romance based not on seduction, but on transformation. And Ursus, he is the silent foundation of the story's emotional strength. A servant, a guardian, a man of monstrous power who never misuses it. He kills only once in the novel, and even then, it is to protect the innocent. In an empire where violence is performance, Ursus's restraint becomes a kind of moral rebellion. He is what Rome cannot understand: strength without cruelty. Let's not forget Chilon either. This character is a masterpiece. Comic relief at first, a coward, a trickster, a schemer. He plays both sides. He sells information. He betrays for gold. But then something happens. He sees the Christians suffer. He sees them forgive. And in perhaps the novel's most touching turn, he seeks redemption. His repentance is not neat. It's messy, desperate, real. And when he dies, sacrificing himself to protect the very people he once betrayed, it isn't just a plot twist. It's a profound statement that no one is beyond saving. That grace doesn't erase the past, but it can redefine it. This is Sienkiewicz's deep belief that change is possible, even at the last breath. Now let's turn to the spiritual rhythm of the novel. It's not a religious tract, but it is religious in tone, quietly, insistently. Faith here is not about doctrine. It's about presence. It's about people who live differently, not louder, not more forcefully, just differently. Christians in Quo Vadis don't try to overthrow Nero. They don't storm the Senate. They endure. They feed the hungry. They refuse to lie. They comfort the dying. In a world ruled by spectacle, they offer something dangerous: simplicity. This is what makes them powerful. And this is why Nero fears them. He doesn't understand them. He cannot control them. Their truth is not transactional. Their joy is not dependent on pleasure. They do not seek revenge, only resurrection. And so the empire, bloated with wealth and steel, trembles before people who kneel to pray. Sienkiewicz understands that ideas are more dangerous than armies, and he gives us this quiet warning. The most powerful institutions crumble not from rebellion, but from refusal. The refusal to hate, the refusal to kill, the refusal to be impressed by power. These are the weapons of the weak, and they're stronger than Rome. Stylistically, the novel is lush. Sienkiewicz writes with a painter's eye. The colors of the toga, the gleam of marble, the scent of roses mingling with blood. It is poetic, but never purple. He knows when to linger and when to let the sentence collapse into silence. His dialogue is precise. He lets characters reveal themselves without preaching. He trusts the reader to feel, to discern, to question. It's also a book deeply aware of death, but not afraid of it. Death in Quo Vadis is not the end. For Nero, it is oblivion, feared, avoided, yet inevitable. For the Christians, it is passage, a door, not a wall. And so the book, even in its darkest moments, remains luminous. Hope flickers at its edges like candlelight. Ultimately, Quo Vadis is not about Christians versus Romans. It's about what endures, about what survives fire. And the answer, Sienkiewicz tells us, is love. Not the romantic kind alone, but love as sacrifice. Love as clarity. Love as something unshakable, even when every stone of the city falls. As the story marches on toward its crescendo, we find ourselves pulled deeper into the very heart of Rome's darkness, and into the light that dares to resist it. At this point in Quo Vadis, the lines between the imperial and the spiritual grow even more distinct. This is where the historical and philosophical stakes reach their peak, and Sienkiewicz begins to quietly, masterfully braid his novel's threads into a tapestry of fate, conviction, and sacrifice. The burning of Rome is the pivotal moment. And it's not just about flames. It's about truth catching fire. Nero, the emperor artist god in his own imagination, watches his city burn while playing the lyre, composing a tragedy as real humans scream. The act isn't just cruelty, it's delusion. It's the empire's madness turned outward. A city of marble, crushed beneath vanity. The fire becomes metaphor, a cleansing, a judgment, a revelation. Sienkiewicz doesn't give us this inferno as spectacle. He gives it as apocalypse, revealing, not destroying. Those who love power are exposed for what they are. Those who love truth find their strength tested. This section of the novel is filled with rapid, breathless scenes. People running through smoke-filled streets, temples crumbling, citizens crying for water, for help, for mercy. And in the middle of it all, Nero composes poetry, blaming Christians for the disaster he caused. Why them? Because they won't play the game. They won't worship him. They won't flatter him. They won't offer sacrifices to the gods or the emperor. In their quiet resistance, they become dangerous, not through revolt, but through refusal. So Nero needs a scapegoat, and the Christians, already strange in their meekness, become the perfect target. This sets the stage for the most haunting part of the book, the persecution. Christians are rounded up, imprisoned, tortured, not for rebellion, not for violence, but for believing in a love that transcends the empire. Sienkiewicz doesn't linger on gore, but the horror is there. He draws it through the characters' reactions, the stillness of their courage, the small gestures, hands held in the darkness, whispered prayers, the hush before the lions. The arena becomes a theater of cruelty, a place where Rome demands a show, and the Christians respond not with screams, but with song. Yes, song. The idea that one might sing as lions approach, or as flames lick one's feet, is more terrifying to an empire than any sword. Because it means Rome cannot control what matters most, the soul. And here, Lygia becomes more than a symbol. She becomes a martyr in waiting. Not yet broken, not yet sacrificed, but standing on the edge of it. Her love for Marcus remains, but her deeper love for Christ, for truth, for grace, becomes her guiding light. And Marcus sees it. He watches her choose suffering over submission. And it shakes him, because he still believes in force, in saving her with strength. But now, strength must become something else. And so we arrive at the moment where Marcus begins his final transformation. He goes to the prisons. He tries to bribe guards. He even pleads with Nero. All of it fails. He cannot buy her freedom. He cannot outmuscle the system. So he turns inward. And in this turning, we see what Sienkiewicz has been preparing us for all along. The real conversion doesn't come from miracles or visions. It comes from helplessness. When all his power is useless, when he stands before the cage and sees Lygia, calm, radiant, unbroken, he begins to understand that love is not domination. It is surrender, not weakness, but surrender to something higher. The Christian message finally takes root, not in his mind, but in his soul. And once he accepts that truth, the story shifts again. Now the climax. Lygia is sentenced to die in the arena. A bull will be released to crush her. It is the most dramatic, brutal form of execution, one reserved for spectacle. But as she is tied to the stake, something unexpected happens. Ursus steps forward. This gentle, quiet giant, the servant, the protector, breaks the rules. He enters the arena not as a gladiator, not as a rebel, but as a man driven by love. And what unfolds is one of the most gripping scenes in all literature. The bull charges. Ursus waits, and with his bare hands, he does the impossible. He strangles the beast, kills it, saves Lygia. The crowd erupts. The same crowd that came for blood is now stunned into admiration. Because true power, selfless, sacrificial, pure, has been revealed. Nero is humiliated. His game is ruined. He cannot condemn Ursus and Lygia now without turning the crowd against him. The people, for a brief moment, remember humanity. And so, in an ironic twist, the empire must bow to love. Marcus and Lygia are reunited, but it's not a fairy tale ending. It's hard-won. The world is still dangerous. The empire still crumbles. But the seed of something new has been planted. And now we transition from summary to reflection, from what happened to why it matters. At this point, we've traveled through the blaze and blood of ancient Rome, witnessed power at its most grotesque, and love at its most redemptive. Now, we step gently into the quiet terrain of thought. This is where Quo Vadis truly begins to bloom, not just as a narrative, but as a mirror held up to human nature, society, and the longing for transcendence. We move from what happened to what it meant, from the facts of the plot to the truths they reveal. First, let's speak of contrast again, not as a literary device, but as a spiritual pulse. The Rome Sienkiewicz constructs is not merely historical, it is psychological. An empire built on ambition, opulence, and ego. Nero is not a villain in the cartoon sense. He is terrifying because he reflects a truth about power. That once you believe you are divine, your cruelty ceases to register as cruelty at all. Every horror becomes justified by your vision of greatness. He is Rome's fever dream, a poet emperor who destroys his own city to match the drama in his head. Sienkiewicz is not merely condemning Nero. He is asking us, what does Rome live today? Is it gone? Or does it take other forms now, softer, more elegant, more digital, but still centered on domination, spectacle, distraction? Quo Vadis holds up this haunting question. What becomes of a society when it loses its soul? And then, in luminous counterpoint, Sienkiewicz presents the Christians. These are not caricatures. They are not saints with golden halos. They are ordinary people moved by something extraordinary. They suffer, but they do not despair. They forgive, but they do not forget. They are not fanatics. They are faithful. This is a vital distinction. In fact, It is one of the most radical messages of the book, that strength can wear silence like armor, that resistance can be gentle, that truth doesn't always shout, it often whispers. This philosophy feels especially profound today. In an age saturated with noise, rage, and performance, Quo Vadis reminds us that real change often begins in stillness, in the small choices no one sees, in the refusal to be bitter, in the decision to love when hatred is easier. Now about Marcus Vinicius. He is the great everyman of the novel, a character who is not evil, but empty. His early desires are shaped by the empire, beauty, conquest, possession. His love for Lygia begins selfishly. He wants her, wants to win her, to own her, but he must evolve, and that evolution is painful. Sienkiewicz doesn't make it easy. Marcus is humbled again and again. His power fails. His pride crumbles. And only when he learns to see Lygia not as an object, but as a person, divine, sacred, inviolable, does he truly begin to love her. This mirrors the spiritual transformation of anyone who walks from darkness into light. It's not a moment. It's a slow undoing, a shedding of skins. Marcus's journey is not about changing sides. It's about becoming human again. And Lygia? She is the novel's spiritual compass, not a loud or didactic character. Her strength is rooted in gentleness. She never preaches, never pushes, but she never compromises either. She embodies a new kind of power, the kind that Rome, for all its legions, cannot conquer. She is not trying to change Marcus. She simply remains herself, and in that unwavering fidelity to her truth, she changes everything. Then we have Ursus, the quiet colossus. His strength is not just physical, it's moral. He is perhaps the most Christ-like character in the book. Humble, loyal, unshakably good. He is a reminder that real masculinity, real heroism, is not domination but protection, not noise but presence. And Chilon, Chidon, the novel's most unlikely soul, a man who begins as a coward, a con artist, a traitor, but who, in the end, gives his life for what is right. His arc is deeply human. He reminds us that grace is never deserved and never denied, that no one is beyond redemption, not even the schemer, not even the hypocrite. This, too, is radical, because Quo Vadis does not divide the world into good and evil. It presents people in motion, souls in process. Every character is capable of betrayal and of transcendence. This is the novel's deepest truth, that transformation is always possible. Always. Now, let's step back and look at the form. Sienkiewicz writes with a cinematic eye, decades before cinema. His descriptions are rich, but never static. He moves like a camera, close up on trembling hands, then pulling back to show the burning city. He balances beauty and horror with almost unbearable elegance. His sentences are shaped like prayers, not because they preach, but because they breathe. They invite you to reflect, not react, to feel the weight of a word before rushing past it. And the structure of a novel? Tightly woven. There are no wasted threads. Every subplot loops back into the main tapestry. Every minor character casts a shadow longer than expected. The pacing mirrors the inner journey of Marcus, from restless and impulsive to steady and reverent. Sienkiewicz's language, too, shifts with this rhythm. The early chapters are rich with color, sensation, indulgence. But as the story progresses, the language grows leaner, simpler, more stripped down. It's as if the prose itself is being purified alongside the characters. And that's intentional. It shows us that the most powerful truths are often the quietest. And the book's central question, its very title, Quo Vadis, where are you going, becomes a refrain not just for Marcus, but for us. Where are we going? Toward what? What governs our choices? Ego or truth? Fear or love? In the end, Quo Vadis is not a story of ancient history. It's a mirror, a meditation, a call. There's something uncanny about the way Quo Vadis haunts your thoughts after you set it down. It lingers, not because of spectacle, but because of resonance. The soul, having brushed against something eternal, quietly asks, "What now?" And this is precisely where the book's classification under level 7, the search for truth, becomes clear. It is not merely a novel about Christian persecution or Roman excess or doomed love. Those are only the outer garments. Beneath them lies a spiritual inquiry of astonishing gravity. What does it mean to live rightly, even when the world punishes you for it? To approach that question, let's begin with a broader theme, the collapse of civilizations. Rome, in Quo Vadis, is not just a location. It is a moral climate, a spiritual temperature reading. Sienkiewicz uses Rome to represent any society that has severed its roots from truth. What follows is predictable. Decay masked as progress, cruelty masked as culture, vanity mistaken for greatness. And yet, this is not a lamentation. It is an illumination. Sienkiewicz suggests that such collapses are not inevitable. They occur not because people are doomed, but because they forget. Forget what matters. Forget who they are. Forget that love and humility build longer-lasting foundations than conquest and pride. Enter Christianity, not as a religion in this context, but as an ethic, a way of being, a set of values that transcend doctrine, forgiveness, sacrifice, dignity, hope. In this world, where the empire views life as expendable and gods as distant, the Christians believe every life has sacred value, not because of social status, not because of bloodline, but because of soul. It's revolutionary. To love your enemy, to bless those who curse you, to die singing instead of retaliating. This is not just different, it is subversive, and it spreads like wildfire. This is one of the most profound philosophical undercurrents of Quo Vadis, the idea that truth doesn't always march in with banners and armies. Sometimes it moves quietly, from soul to soul, through acts of kindness, through moments of courage, through the gentle refusal to bow to cruelty. The Christian characters, especially the older ones, Peter, Paul, Pomponia, carry this spirit with stunning stillness. They aren't loud. They don't argue. They live. Their peace is louder than any of Nero's fanfares. And they draw people in, not by debate, but by example. This speaks to a deep truth about human nature. We are shaped most powerfully not by ideologies, but by presences, by people who live in alignment with something greater than themselves, people who embody what they believe, not just proclaim it. Marcus's transformation, then, is not a conversion in the modern sense. It is a rediscovery of his own humanity. This is the genius of Sienkiewicz's character construction. Marcus is never shown kneeling at an altar or weeping in Revelation. He changes because he begins to see. He watches how Christians live. He listens. He reflects. And slowly his heart softens. The man who once saw Lygia as a prize to be won begins to see her as a soul to be honored. This is the slow architecture of grace, the invisible scaffolding of real change. Let's not forget the suffering. Sienkiewicz does not shy away from cruelty. The Christians die in arenas, on crosses, under fire. They are mocked, tortured, torn apart. But the depiction is never gratuitous. It is deliberate. He wants us to feel the weight of their sacrifice. And yet, the story does not end in despair. It ends in dawn. Nero may burn Rome, but he cannot burn truth. The city may fall, but the soul survives. The empire collapses, but the gospel grows. This is the transcendence at the core of the book. That truth outlives tyranny. That love outlasts empires. That something greater always rises, even when everything else is reduced to ash. Now, let's step into the literary space once more. The way Sienkiewicz structures the emotional rhythm of the book is nothing short of symphonic. He gives us great crescendos, massacres, riots, public spectacles, but always follows them with quiet interludes, a prayer whispered, a hand held, a mother's tears. He allows space to feel. This pacing is a moral choice. He knows that real horror is not in the violence, but in its contrast with innocence. And real beauty is not just in grand gestures, but in the soft, steady resistance of the human heart to corruption. His language does not lecture. It flows. And sometimes when describing a garden, a moonlit night, a child at play, it almost weeps. You feel his longing, not just for a better world, but for a world where people remember the better angels of their nature. And maybe that's what Quo Vadis truly is, a remembrance, a call to remember what matters, who we are, why we're here. The question lingers in the title. Quo Vadis Domini? Where are you going, Lord? According to tradition, this was Peter's question to Christ as he fled Rome. And Christ's answer was quiet but searing. I'm going to Rome to be crucified again. Peter understood. He turned back. He walked toward his death, not with fear, but with fidelity. That, right there, is the core of the book. A single step toward truth, even when it hurts, even when it costs you everything, especially then. The image of Peter turning back toward Rome stays with us because it represents the decision that everyone eventually must face to flee or to return, to protect oneself or to surrender to something larger, something more enduring. That moment, nestled deep within Quo Vadis, is not only pivotal for the narrative, but becomes a mirror for the reader or listener. It's asking, when truth calls, will you walk toward it? Let's carry that question forward as we continue to explore the layers of this novel, because this is where Quo Vadis becomes more than just a historical epic. It becomes a philosophical parable, and not in the abstract, ivory tower kind of way, but in the real, piercing kind that lives in the marrow of daily decisions. Think of Marcus Vinicius once again. This was a man of great privilege, pride, and passion. His transformation isn't just romantic, it's ethical. He is slowly educated by pain and love. And that slow education, that moral recalibration, is one of the greatest triumphs of the novel. What Sienkiewicz does so well is show us that the soul does not evolve through comfort. Marcus doesn't change because he reads a scroll or hears a sermon. He changes because he is confronted with his own shallowness, by Lygia's integrity, by Ursus's courage, by the unshakable peace of the Christians even in death. This shift from being a man of appetite to a man of conscience is part of what makes Quo Vadis such a profound meditation on human potential. Marcus was not born noble in spirit. He becomes noble by choosing love over possession, humility over dominance, soul over self. Now, let's linger with the characters for a bit longer, because the novel isn't only about Marcus and Lygia. It's about the full constellation of souls orbiting around this moral event horizon, Nero. Let's talk about Nero. As a figure, Nero is terrifying not just because of what he does, but because of what he symbolizes. He is the embodiment of ego without restraint, of power divorced from wisdom. He is an artist who believes his emotions are more important than lives, a god in his own eyes who sees the world as a stage for his vanity. He's not just dangerous, he's absurd. And Sienkiewicz lets us feel that absurdity. Nero is bloated on flattery, spinning songs while cities burn. His madness isn't sudden, it's cumulative. It grows in the silence of those too afraid to speak the truth. His cruelty is a kind of theater, and everyone plays their part. Petronius with his wit, Tigellinus with his sycophancy, the Senate with its cowardice. This is another central insight of Quo Vadis, that evil doesn't need agreement to thrive, just compliance, just silence, just people choosing safety over justice. That's what makes the Christians so radical. They say no, quietly, gently, but unwaveringly. They won't worship the emperor. They won't deny their faith. They won't surrender their dignity, even when it costs them their lives. This refusal is not political, it is metaphysical. It's a belief in something higher than the state, something more permanent than empire. And in this resistance, Sienkiewicz shows us the roots of spiritual revolution. Remember Pomponia Graecina? Her role is small but luminous. A Roman matron, elegant and composed, yet already deeply Christian in spirit. She shows that faith doesn't require the desert or martyrdom. It can bloom in the quiet chambers of a Roman villa, beneath silk and marble, in the hush of whispered prayers. And then there's Ursus, the gentle giant, a man of brute strength and almost childlike humility. He doesn't preach, but he protects. He doesn't argue, but he serves. In many ways, Ursus is the embodiment of Christian strength, not aggressive, but resolute, not flashy, but faithful. He guards Lygia not just with muscle, but with unwavering love. Every character in Quo Vadis reflects a possibility within us. Petronius, the aesthete, might seem the most modern of all. Witty, charming, brilliant, but hollow. He represents the person who knows the truth but cannot live it. He sees Nero's evil, mocks it even, but will not defy it, until at last it's too late. His suicide, so ornate, so composed, is not noble. It's tragic, because beauty without courage cannot save, and knowledge without action is paralysis. Petronius dies as he lived, entertained, elegant, but ultimately empty. In contrast, Paul and Peter offer a stark simplicity. They are old, poor, scarred by years of hardship, but they carry something immeasurably precious: clarity. They speak of love and judgment, of sin and redemption, of heaven and earth not as poets, but as witnesses. Their words cut because they come from lived truth. Their hands are calloused not by war, but by work. And when Peter walks toward his own cross, he does so not with despair, but with devotion. This is what Level 7 in our playlist is all about. The pursuit of truth that transcends comfort, the embrace of meaning that outlives the moment, the willingness to walk into the fire not for glory, but for goodness. This is why Quo Vadis belongs in this level, because it is not content to show us what happened. It asks us, what would you have done? And even more haunting, what will you do now? The questions linger like incense after Mass. The truth in this novel does not arrive with trumpets. It comes in the stillness, in the tears of Lygia, in the quiet prayers of Peter, in the final gaze between Marcus and a world reborn. And in that silence, something extraordinary happens. We begin to change, too. The moment when Marcus Vinicius, once a man sculpted by pride and hardened by the empire's violence, kneels beside the imprisoned Christians, his transformation is complete. And it's not dramatized with fanfare. Sienkiewicz doesn't need fireworks because the weight of humility, when it finally arrives, speaks louder than the crackling fires of Nero's torches. This is the true climax of Quo Vadis. Not the lions, not the arena, not even Nero's grotesque parties, but this quiet submission to a truth that refuses to die, even under chains and death sentences. Now we shift gently into the final sweep of the story summary. And while the plot hurtles toward martyrdom, cruelty, and spectacle, what rises within the narrative is serenity. Let's pause and feel that for a moment. Because as grotesque as Nero's persecutions become, turning human lives into flaming torches, orchestrating the deaths of believers in theatrical horror shows, the Christians do not curse. They do not claw or cling to their rights. They sing. Yes, they sing. As someone whose soul has been cracked open, who sees for the first time that strength lies not in power, but in mercy, that life's truest triumph isn't in surviving, but in sacrificing for something pure. This shift in perception is where Quo Vadis pulls ahead of so many novels of its time. It's not merely content to entertain. It aims to realign your compass. It wants to reorder what you call victory. Let's return to Lygia and Ursus for a moment. Their fate, trapped in Nero's sadistic game, should be hopeless. But the novel has, by now, completely inverted our expectations. We no longer see Ursus as brute muscle or Lygia as fragile beauty. We see them as vessels of light. And so, when Ursus, in the arena, defeats a bull with his bare hands, not out of violence, but to save Lygia, it doesn't feel like a triumph of force. It feels like an answer from heaven. That moment, impossible and symbolic, is a miracle cloaked in flesh. And the crowd feels it. Even those who came to watch slaughter begin to feel the stirrings of conscience. Murmurs ripple. A pause settles. And in that hush, we see a society beginning, faintly, to awaken. Yes, some still cheer. Many remain blind. But a crack has formed. And through that crack, a new light begins to leak. It's here that Nero loses everything, even though he still wears the crown. He has shown Rome his true face. He has mocked compassion, burned innocence, made a theater of murder, and the people at last begin to look away. Not all, not most, but enough. The spell of spectacle begins to falter. And it's in this quiet cultural shift, this subtle revolution of the human heart, that Quo Vadis plants its most powerful seed. Empires crumble, dictators fall, but conscience, once awakened, is eternal. Petronius's final act, his suicide, is one of tragic beauty, and yet it's not redemptive. He doesn't die for others. He dies to escape ugliness. His farewell letter is barbed, yes, but it carries no vision beyond his own suffering. Compare this to Peter. Peter does not escape. He returns to Rome, knowing death awaits. And when he is crucified upside down by his own request, he leaves behind not just a legend, but a movement, a legacy, a church. This distinction between escape and sacrifice, between wit and wisdom, between disillusionment and hope, is what gives the novel its haunting depth. Marcus and Lygia survive, but their survival is not the climax. It's the beginning. They live not as lovers reunited, but as bearers of a new world. Their love is now rooted in something greater than themselves, an ideal of peace, of truth, of spiritual revolution. They leave Rome, not to flee, but to build, to carry with them a message born in blood, tempered in fire, and sealed with songs in the night. Quo Vadis ends not with thunder, but with sunrise. A new day over a broken city. Now that we've walked through the full summary of this extraordinary novel, we can begin to dive, slowly, softly, into the second part of our journey tonight, the analysis and the review. This next section is where we will explore the deeper meanings, the philosophical echoes, the eternal questions, and the way Sienkiewicz carves something truly immortal from the ashes of Rome. But before we pivot, hold this image gently in your mind. The city still smoldering. A shepherd's staff leaning against a stone wall. A man and a woman walking quietly toward the edge of empire, toward light. So now we exhale. We've wandered through the smoldering ruins of Nero's Rome. We've witnessed faith born in fire, and now we let ourselves drift into still waters. The deeper meanings, the hidden architecture, the lasting soul of Quo Vadis. Because this isn't just a historical drama. It's not just torches, togas, and tears. It's a meditation on transcendence, on what it means to live beyond the visible, to love beyond the self, and to choose light in an age drowning in spectacle and cruelty. Let's begin with Sienkiewicz himself. A Polish author writing in the late 19th century, Sienkiewicz was composing this epic in a time of cultural oppression. His homeland was partitioned, its language suppressed, its people discouraged from remembering who they were. So when he wrote Quo Vadis, a story set in ancient Rome, he wasn't escaping the present. He was speaking directly to it. And that's the first transcendence. The novel isn't just about Christians resisting Rome. It's about the human spirit resisting any empire that tries to erase identity, faith, or dignity. Poland under imperial control. Rome under Nero. Modern life under the grip of apathy. The shape of the tyrant may change, but the soul's resistance is timeless. Sienkiewicz writes with the precision of a historian, but the heart of a prophet. His descriptions are lush, sensual even, dripping with color, sound, smell, but they always carry a weight beneath them. Nero's palace isn't just lavish, it's hollow. Petronius's wit isn't just clever, it's dying. Rome's glory isn't just gold, it's wrought disguised as radiance. That layered imagery is a hallmark of level 7 storytelling. It speaks not just to what is, but to what lies beneath, to what's eternal. Now consider the structure. The book begins with a question, "Where are you going, Lord?" and spirals outward from that single phrase. That one question, asked by Peter as he flees persecution, is the novel's spine. It echoes quietly in every moral choice, every transformation, every death. It's not just a question for Peter. It's a question for Marcus, for us, for every soul standing at a crossroads between fear and purpose. And the answer, whispered again and again through action, not dialogue, is simple. I go to Rome to be crucified again with my people. That, my friends, is the kind of moral clarity that silences empires. Sienkiewicz contrasts spectacle with spirit, power with peace, control with surrender. Nero throws orgies, Peter breaks bread. Nero sings of himself. The Christians sing of hope. One builds palaces that burn. The other builds faith that endures fire. Even the love story, which seems traditional at first glance, noble man falls for virtuous woman, is quietly subversive. Because Lygia doesn't change for Marcus. Marcus changes for her, and not just to win her, but because she awakens in him the part that was starved. Conscience. Lygia doesn't seduce him. She elevates him. And that's a key principle of level 7 narratives. Love isn't about fusion. It's about awakening. It's about being brought face to face with a truth that demands your transformation. And Marcus, the archetype of Roman masculinity, becomes something much more nuanced. He doesn't just become gentle. He becomes truly free. He's no longer a soldier of empire. He becomes a soldier of compassion. And what of Peter? What of this quiet, trembling old man, this fisherman turned cornerstone? Sienkiewicz paints him not as a grand orator, but as a figure of quiet magnetism. His strength lies not in speeches, but in presence, in staying, in returning, in choosing the cross, not as defeat, but as final witness. It's the kind of portrayal that lodges deep in your mind. Not flashy, not heroic in a classic sense, but morally enormous. And that's what makes Quo Vadis transcendent. It doesn't shout. It glows. Now let's step back and look at the setting as metaphor. Rome is not just Rome. It's every civilization teetering at the edge of its own decadence. It's every society that has forgotten soul in its obsession with spectacle. It's every culture that has turned bread and circuses into policy. Sound familiar? Sienkiewicz isn't preaching. He's warning, and he's doing so through contrast. Christianity in this novel isn't defined by creeds or cathedrals. It's defined by action, by mercy, by radical forgiveness in the face of flames. The early believers are poor, scattered, socially invisible, but they shine. Their presence in Rome is like oxygen in a gaslit room. Quiet, invisible, but essential. And it makes us ask, what we burn for? Because Quo Vadis doesn't just show Christians dying. It shows why they die. And more importantly, how they die with peace, with resolve, with dignity that refuses to be stripped. And the real miracle? Not that they survive, but that their message survives. Rome falls. The cross remains. That's the architecture of transcendence. That's why this book belongs in the Level 7 playlist. Because it's not just asking us to remember history. It's asking us to feel the eternal battle between power and peace, self and sacrifice, spectacle and spirit. And what's more, Sienkiewicz makes us long for the better path, even in the face of cruelty. Because when the book closes and the fires die down, and the city lies quiet, we are left not with despair, but with the unshakable sense that goodness, quiet, luminous, stubborn goodness, has already won. Let's now glide further into the deep. We've walked the streets of Nero's Rome, felt the heartbeat of first-century Christians, and tasted the bitter sweetness of sacrifice and transformation. But now, the stiller waters ask us to pause. Ask us not only what was said, but how it was said. Let's talk style. Let's talk craft. Let's talk about how Sienkiewicz manages to hold a reader or a dreamer across hundreds of pages, across cultures, languages, centuries. The prose of Quo Vadis is not minimalist. It doesn't whisper in fragments. It sings, lush, vivid, sensory-saturated, and yet never indulgent. There's a restraint beneath the lyricism, a discipline under the beauty. Every metaphor is weighted. Every descriptive flourish is anchored to feeling. Sienkiewicz paints with language, yes, but he sculpts with moral vision. The sensory detail isn't there to impress. It's there to immerse. We don't read about the banquet. We smell the roasted peacock. We don't learn about the dungeon. We feel the cold, damp stone press against our backs. We don't just hear the screams in the arena. We see the eyes of the child clinging to his mother, defiant in terror. And in that immersion, the abstract becomes intimate. The ancient past becomes present tense. This is crucial for a Level 7 text. The search for truth cannot be done from a distance. It has to be felt. The weight of chains, the warmth of bread, the salt of tears. These are spiritual instruments in Sienkiewicz's hands. They're not decoration. They're conduits. Let's talk narrative rhythm. Quo Vadis doesn't move like a thriller. It breathes like an opera. It swells, it recedes. There are moments of silence, of stillness, and then sudden crescendo, fire, betrayal, kisses, blood. But after every blaze, he gives you time to sit with the ash, time to absorb, time to ask not just what happened, but why. It's in these silences that the novel reveals its true depth. Think of Petronius, for instance, the arbiter of elegance, a man who speaks in irony and moves in silk, but who slowly, so very slowly, begins to see the rot behind the gold. His suicide is not just a plot point. It's a philosophy, a final critique of a world he can no longer dance through. Or Ursus, the giant servant, a picture of brute strength paired with childlike innocence. He's more than a character. He's an archetype, the power of goodness unweaponized, loyalty stripped of ego. In a lesser novel, he'd be comic relief. Here, he's a pillar of moral gravity. He doesn't speak much, but when he does or acts, you listen. These characters aren't tools for the plot. They're meditations on human types. The skeptic who wants to believe, the lover who fears to hope, the brute who cradles gentleness like a secret flame. Every one of them is drawn toward transcendence, not always consciously, not always successfully, but undeniably. And then we come back to Lygia. What makes her remarkable is not her perfection. It's her clarity. She's not reactive. not dramatic, not seduced by power or rhetoric. She knows who she is, and that unshakable identity, forged not in pride, but in purpose, becomes the still point around which Marcus's storm begins to calm. She is not one, she chooses. And in that choosing, she reveals the spine of the story, the quiet, radiant strength of conscience. Now, let's step back once more from language, from plot, from character, and look at the architecture of meaning. Sienkiewicz structures the entire novel like a passage, a journey, a crossing, from Rome to Jerusalem, from power to peace, from man to soul. And not just for characters, but for us. The reader begins in a world of marble and madness, and is slowly pulled, gently, inexorably, toward a stillness, toward something larger than narrative, toward truth. And how does he manage that? By never preaching, by never condescending, by trusting story to do the work of sermon, by letting beauty reveal belief. That's the genius. Because in the end, Quo Vadis is not a conversion tale. It's not even about Christianity, narrowly understood. It's about choosing the real over the convenient, the invisible over the theatrical, the eternal over the temporary. It's a book that dares to ask, what do we kneel to? Do we kneel to gold? To noise? To empire? Or do we kneel to something that doesn't burn, even in Nero's fire? That's the question that hums through the novel's final pages like an unstruck bell. And that's the question we carry with us into our own Rome, our own daily empire, our own crossroads. Quo Vadis? Where are we going? And are we willing, like Peter, to turn around? We've wandered with lions, watched cities burn, held trembling hands in catacombs. And now, at the edge of story, we descend one more level into the soul of Quo Vadis, into the why, into the enduring. Let's consider the legacy, what made this novel not just a bestseller of its day, but a literary lodestar for generations. First, the context. Sienkiewicz wasn't writing in a vacuum. When Quo Vadis was published in 1896, Poland didn't exist on the map. His homeland was partitioned, swallowed by empires. Polish identity was not a given. It was an active memory of resistance. And that's important, because this book, while Roman in setting, is deeply Polish in spirit. The struggle between imperial domination and spiritual freedom. The refusal to bow to power for power's sake. The quiet, persistent conviction that truth, not force, shapes history. Sienkiewicz wasn't just telling a story. He was preserving a soul. Now, let's look at the philosophical core of the book. Not as dogma, but as invitation. This is where its level 7 placement becomes radiant. The search for truth. Not truth as fact, but truth as alignment. Inner coherence. Harmony between conscience and action, between love and justice. The early Christians in Quo Vadis don't just believe in Christ. They embody a way of being, a way that refuses cruelty. That meets mockery with kindness. That breaks bread in basements while Nero dines in palaces. It's easy in our era to see faith through cynicism, to reduce it to institution or history. But Sienkiewicz brings it back to its elemental pulse: humility, service, sacrifice, the trembling power of choosing to suffer for another. And that's not religious in a narrow sense. It's human. It's the echo of every mother shielding her child, every friend who waits at a hospital bed, every stranger who gives without name or praise. Sienkiewicz is not converting readers. He's reminding them that beneath the empire's roar, beneath the screen glare and the algorithmic noise, there's something quieter calling us. A question. Quo Vadis? Where are you going? Where's your heart going? And what are you willing to lose to find it? Now, let's talk structure, because Sienkiewicz builds his world like a cathedral. High arches of plot, stained glass moments of emotional clarity, foundation stones of historical realism. The pacing is deliberate. He doesn't rush the fall of Nero or the rise of faith. He lets time do its work. He lets character evolve not in leaps, but in layers. Marcus Vinicius doesn't have an epiphany in chapter 2. He wrestles. He resists. He returns to lust, to pride, to violence. And still love tugs him back. Not the abstract idea of love, but Lygia. Her gaze. Her silence. Her refusal to be a prize. And it's that refusal that saves him. Let's stay here a moment, because Quo Vadis is not just a tale of Christian perseverance. It's a meditation on power and love, on how true love, real love, refuses domination, doesn't conquer but converts, gently, fiercely, by simply existing in its own integrity. In a world like Nero's, and let's be honest, like ours, that kind of love is radical, unthreatening on the surface, but subversive to the core, because empires thrive on spectacle, on control, on people being useful. But love, it doesn't care if you're a Caesar or a slave. It asks the same thing of everyone: honesty, courage, tenderness. That's the revolution. That's why Nero fears the Christians. Not because they're plotting, but because they aren't. Because they'd rather die singing than live saluting. And what does that do to a tyrant? It exposes him. Stripped of terror, what is he? A child in costume. A scream with no echo. That's the great reversal of Quo Vadis. It's not the lions or the crucifixions that break the empire. It's the refusal to hate, to become like the oppressor, to mirror violence. Instead, the novel ends in gentleness, not triumph, not vengeance. Marcus and Lygia walk away, not into sunset, but into continuance, into the long, slow work of building a life, planting a family, passing on the quiet truth they found in the ashes of spectacle. And that's what makes the novel eternal. Because in every age, there is a Nero, and in every heart, the chance to become Marcus, or Lygia, or even Ursus. Not perfect, but choosing, slowly, courageously, quietly. We're nearly there. Let's settle deeper into the final echoes of Quo Vadis, into the artistry, the moral resonance, the enduring pulse that still lives in its pages. By now, the narrative has softened. Rome is not burning anymore. Nero's song has ended, swallowed by silence. The spectacle is over, but something else has begun, and that something is what gives this novel its deepest gravity. Let's talk about Sienkiewicz's prose, the vessel that carried all this meaning. It's lush, yes, ornate at times, a classical elegance that deliberately echoes the grandeur of its setting. But it's also deeply tactile. You can feel the silk of Roman tunics, smell the sweat of gladiators, hear the hush of sandals over marble. And yet, the real poetry isn't in the world building, it's in the contrasts. Sienkiewicz juxtaposes imperial splendor with underground stillness. A golden palace with a candlelit prayer. a drunken orgy with a humble meal shared by believers. Why does this matter? Because through contrast, he invites clarity. Like a painter who puts bright white beside shadow to make it shine more fiercely. The more grotesque Nero becomes, the more luminous Lygius seems. The more decadent the empire, the more sacred the simplicity of faith. This is not just narrative craft, it's moral architecture. He's not preaching, he's showing, inviting you to lean in, not because he demands agreement, but because he awakens memory of what it feels like to belong to something bigger than the self. And here's where level 7 becomes not just a classification, but a summons. Because Quo Vadis is not about Christians triumphing over Rome. It's about the human soul transcending history itself. The question isn't, who won? It's, who chose love when it cost everything? Who forgave when it made no sense? Who lived as if eternity was real, even when the world laughed? These are level 7 questions. They live beyond the ego, beyond success or failure. They point toward what some might call the divine, and others might simply call truth. That's why the novel endures. It doesn't give you tidy answers. It offers mirrors, lanterns, questions whispered in the night. And one of the most enduring is this. What do we do with suffering? Not abstractly, personally, historically, existentially, because suffering fills Quo Vadis like smoke. It's in the beatings, the hunger, the fear. But more profoundly, it's in the silence before the lions come. In the doubts Marcus carries, even as he changes. In Petronius's final, exquisite resignation. And yet, the suffering here is never the end. It is a means, a crucible, not glorified but acknowledged, and in time redeemed, not erased, transformed. It's a hard truth and a beautiful one, because we live in a world that wants to avoid pain, to mask it, numb it, outrun it. But Quo Vadis invites us to sit with it, to witness what pain can become when filtered through love, through conscience, through time. And that brings us to another quiet triumph of this novel, its characters. They aren't saints in stained glass. They're full of contradictions. Marcus begins as a warrior, a hedonist, a man of his era. But love unsettles him. Humility disorients him. And slowly, beautifully, he reorients. He becomes less concerned with conquest and more concerned with truth. Not because it's fashionable, but because it's necessary. And Lygia, she's no weak captive. She holds a power far greater than his sword. The power to wait, to forgive, to remain intact in a world obsessed with breaking things. Ursus, too, is unforgettable. His brute strength, tempered by a devotion so pure it becomes holy. He kills not to dominate, but to protect. His violence is reluctant. His love, absolute. Even Nero, grotesque as he is, offers insight into the rot of unchecked ego, into the pitiful emptiness of power without purpose. Sienkiewicz doesn't make monsters for spectacle. He makes them to warn, to mirror the abyss we each might fall into if we forget what matters. And perhaps the most haunting character is Petronius. His wit, his decadence, his fatal elegance. He's the man who knows too much and believes too little. And yet, in the end, he chooses beauty as his final act. That's the paradox. He cannot believe in Christian hope, but he still believes in grace, in style, in one last act of dignity. Even in death, Quo Vadis refuses despair. The world may burn, but the soul can still choose. That is its gift, its relevance, its power, not in its setting, but in its insight, into what it means to be human when humanity is at risk, into what lasts when everything collapses. And what lasts is love. And now, as the embers cool and the story closes, we turn fully to reflection. Why does Quo Vadis endure? Not just as a historical novel, not merely as a literary monument, but as something deeper, something spiritual, something that finds its way again and again into the quiet corners of our minds when we're alone with the question, what does it all mean? It belongs, utterly, unshakably, to playlist level 7, the search for truth. Not because it offers the truth like a neat, polished gem, but because it wanders boldly and without apology into the darkest caves of power, suffering, and conscience to seek it. Let's look one last time at the structure of that search. On the surface, Quo Vadis is a romance, a historical epic, a clash of worlds. But peel back the veil, and you'll find it's really a book of spiritual thresholds. Marcus crosses one, from selfishness to sacrifice. Lygia holds one, the inner sanctum of faith untouched by fear. Nero falls from one, from human into hollow monster, consumed by his own insatiable reflection. And Petronius, he straddles the line, a man who knows beauty, but cannot believe in redemption. A man whose final gesture is not for glory, but for quiet, private grace. That gesture, his careful, lyrical suicide, is one of the most tragic and beautiful in literature. Not because it is death, but because it is artful resistance. The final act of a man who sees no hope in the heavens but still chooses dignity in despair. These are the figures Sienkiewicz leaves us with. Not flat archetypes, but living vessels of paradox. And that is what makes the novel so rich for analysis. We mustn't forget, too, the context in which the book was written. Sienkiewicz was a Pole under foreign rule, his homeland erased from the map, his people enduring occupation. And here he is, in 1896, writing not a fiery nationalist tract, but a story about Christians under Roman tyranny. Why? Because the battle for identity, for belief, for integrity under empire, that was his people's truth. He knew that the deepest victories aren't won by swords or rebellions. They're won by preserving the soul, intact, unbroken through the storm. It is no accident that the novel centers on early Christianity, a faith born in humility, raised in persecution, and triumphant in its quiet refusal to yield to hate. That faith, as depicted here, is not naive. It is radical, a challenge to everything the Roman world stood for: pride, power, indulgence, spectacle. Where Rome says, conquer, Christ says, forgive. Where Nero demands worship, the Christians kneel in hidden rooms, singing by candlelight. This is the heart of the book, that the true revolution begins within. And when we apply that to our own time, our own frantic digital age, the novel doesn't feel old. It feels almost prophetic, because we too live among empires, not of marble and legions, but of algorithm and appetite. We too are asked daily to trade our peace for spectacle, our silence for noise, our integrity for influence. And like Marcus, like Lygia, we must choose what or who guides us. The title itself, Quo Vadis, is a question posed to Christ by Peter. Lord, where are you going? It's the question of the book. It's the question of every seeker. Where are we going? Toward what? For whom? And will we go alone or with love guiding our steps? The book doesn't answer for us. That's its brilliance. It doesn't give us doctrine. It gives us longing, the ache for truth, the hunger for meaning that can endure lions, fire, and even death. And that's what places this novel at the pinnacle of cognitive and emotional depth. It is quite simply about transcendence, not the fluffy kind, not the kind that floats on clouds and hums mantras, the hard-earned kind, the kind found in prison cells, in burned-out amphitheaters, in the bloody sand of the arena, and still, somehow, in forgiveness. In the final chapters, as peace settles on Marcus and Lygia's humble life together, it's not just a resolution. It's a statement that even when everything else crumbles, love can be a form of truth made flesh. That's what Sienkiewicz offers. Not comfort, but clarity. And as you drift off tonight, perhaps that's what lingers. Not the spectacle, not the violence, but the stillness that came after. The candles glow in the darkness. The hush after the hymn. The quiet whisper, not of empire, but of eternity. And now, here we are at the edge of the story, where the last page turns into stillness and words give way to dreams. Let's slow everything down together. You've walked with emperors and saints tonight. You've stood in Rome's marble corridors, watched flames dance across the city, and felt the hush of ancient prayers echo through catacombs. You've seen cruelty in full display, but also redemption, gentle and quiet, rising like dawn behind the ruins. Let your breath settle. Let your thoughts grow soft. This story, so grand in scale, so fierce in spirit, ends not in a roar, but in peace. A garden, a home, a love that endured, and maybe, just maybe, that's what you'll carry with you into sleep. Not the weight of Rome, but the lightness of grace. Remember, the search for truth doesn't always take us up mountains or into bookshelves. Sometimes it simply takes us into silence, into stillness, into ourselves. So rest easy now. Let go of the noise of today and sink into the calm that follows understanding. The kind of calm that only comes after witnessing a soul evolve, a heart awaken, a world change. You made it here, to the very end. Let the quiet embrace you now. You've earned it. Sweet dreams.